And I won't provide too much context for this presentation. I know for the climate friendly and equitable communities work, a lot of you are engaged in that. And we've had several presentations already from Zachary on that. There's a special OMSC work group as well on that. This was kind of focusing a little bit on the case studies work that was part of that, again, modeling and analytical efforts that Zachary's leading, also through the contract that he's also leading. So this will be a little bit different focus, I think, than some of the other presentations that you might have heard from Zachary. But with that, yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Zachary.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? And can you see my intro slide?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I don't think I can monitor the chat, so I will make sure somebody in the room is doing that. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. Zachary Horowitz with ODOT, with TPAL, working on the program, the CFEC program with Teresa Conley and a number of other folks. One of our main to-dos in our scope of work for the project was a couple of case studies. We narrowed it down to doing two, one for the trip-based models in the state and one for a activity-based model in the state, which is Southern Oregon. And I'll touch on some preliminary information about that. I'm also thrilled to see so many folks online and then in the room today. It's really great to be able to present this information to you. I'll cover, given our diverse audience, I'll talk a little bit about our guidelines and process. Always with engineers, we have our process. We had a number of different important priorities to do with the modeling guidance. We're developing one, which is to implement the climate-friendly areas. The second one is to calculate vehicle miles traveled in accordance with the rule. We have these two case studies, and I'll talk a little bit about next steps. For those interested in knowing what our third priority was, it's related to performance measures and standards. I'm not talking about that today, though. Our modeling goals when we started the project, and this is in some ways a core function of the revised rules in Division 12, is to come up with modeling guidance. And the guidance term here is selected purposely. It's not necessarily requirements. It builds on existing guidance. We all know, depending on trip-based or activity-based, TPAL managed or MPO managed, models are generally run similarly, but always have important differences. The new transportation planning rules in Division 12, there are a number of them. There's lots of them, but there's a few that specifically apply to modeling type work. One is the VMT definition. You see there in Section 5, Rule 64, the desire to calculate VMT per capita for jurisdictions, cities, and counties that are subject to the rules in 160. The implementation of climate-friendly rules. There's a number of different rules as part of the 300 series. Taking a look at VMT per capita is dependent on whether a transportation system plan has a new capacity adding project. That's in the 30. I'm not saying these are all of them, but these are some of the main ones that we really focused on. And the goal, one of the main goals, and I had heard this sort of from day one in this position, was to come up with a process that's consistent, repeatable, defensible in case there's challenges, and accurate. In as much as our modeling is accurate, and we know it always is. And of course, the alignment with the greenhouse gas emissions rules in Division 44. Our development process, and I really will thank a number of people online and in the room that have contributed mightily to this. We certainly could have not done it without you. This includes all the work that you've provided through our OMSC working group, plenty of meetings outside of that, work sessions, and all that best practices and advice, material you've provided to us, work on the ground has really been helpful. We started off really polling that group and identifying what areas of modeling can we focus on, which are going to be impactful in terms of moving the needle on VMT per capita, as far as, let's say, implementing the climate-friendly areas. And once we developed that, we brought it into an annotated outline, fleshed it out a little bit more into our modeling guidance, and then had an opportunity of doing two case studies, at which point the consultants, DKS primarily and RSG, took a look at the guidance, used that as their template for moving through the case studies, realized information was missing, steps were incomplete, and then they were able to continually refine that. That process is continually ongoing now, and it's certainly not going to end with the close of this contract. Let's see, then again, the case studies, and I'll get to that in just a couple more slides. For the climate-friendly area integration, there's lots of different elements. For those that are maybe unfamiliar with that term, climate-friendly areas are similar to the multimodal areas, the MMAs that have been part of the Oregon Highway Plan for a number of years now. The idea here is that they're supposed to be higher density areas. They're required as part of the rules from DLCD and are effectively mixed use areas with higher density housing and employment, walkable, bikeable areas where people don't have to drive or certainly can drive less as a way of reducing VMT as part of the transportation system planning process. How to integrate them into the model really takes a look at a lot of different elements, including elements of socio-demographic data using or suggesting using the population synthesizer for non-activity-based models, Metro being a bit of an exception in that case. Figuring out how to allocate households and employment using place types, the Oregon place types, a little bit tied to vision eval to understand if we're developing areas that sort of meet a TOD or mixed use category, and then even getting down to the true nitty gritty, looking at elements of intersection density, which does tie to place types, and centroid connectors. Are they well placed? Do they have the right length and the right speeds assigned to them to make sure that we're making connections, especially as it relates to the active modes, walking and biking primarily. Just a brief note on the vehicle miles per capita. I think even from Shen's presentation and maybe Tara's questions, there's multiple different ways of measuring VMT. We have our method, which ties directly to that rule in Division 12, Rule 5, definition 64. These are household-based light vehicles that originate in a city or county, whatever we're doing the TSP on. We're looking at internal to internal trips, so trips from a city within that same TAZ or outside of the city boundaries, internal to within the model area, internal trips that started in a city or county that may leave the model area, and we're integrating aspects of the SWIM model, the statewide integrated model. Particular challenges in areas like in Southern Oregon where people are escaping to California, or I suppose in Idaho, or not in Idaho, but in Washington State too. And then for the non-home-based trips, tying those back to specific jurisdictions, as you know, or you may know, activity-based models, tour-based models, this is relatively straightforward. One of that strength of that model, but the trip-based model is not so easy, but we seem to have figured out a method that's seems to be pretty good. All right, now what everybody's come for our two case studies. I'll start with Ashland first and then touch on Milwaukee, just so everybody knows. In Milwaukee, it's a trip-based model as part of Metro's MPO. The climate-friendly area is designated as the Metro 2040 Town Centers. That's actually true for all jurisdictions within the Metro area. Those count as CFAs per the rule. The non-home-based trip calculation, again, trying to assign non-home-based trips that are occurring outside the jurisdiction or within the jurisdiction to that specific jurisdiction is a bit of a challenge. Mostly because of Metro's process to do planning for the entire MPO. There's maybe slightly less opportunity to do some modifications from the HIAs, the household size, income, and age. In Ashland, a little bit different. It's managed by TPAL. They had 3 potential CFA candidate areas that we were looking to integrate. Those are not yet adopted, I believe, by the city of Ashland. So we were really just testing out the ones that had advanced at that point. And it says we work with the city of Ashland on demographics, and that is true. But one thing we learned from all of this work is, and I think hopefully all the modelers online and in the room will appreciate this, is the recognition that modeling takes lots of time and since it may be a larger part of transportation system plan, we want to make sure that we have as much time and get started as early as possible if we want to have as much information available and collaboration with the jurisdictions that we're working with. And this would be true from TPAL or for consultants as well. So Ashlyn, these 6 steps will probably, again, be familiar to many folks. The highlighted ones in bold and italics are ones I'm going to focus on the next few slides, but basically here's our modeling process, identifying our reference inputs, tweaking some land use assumptions. Again, these are related to CFAs. We soon learned early on that just making modifications within the climate-friendly areas means that we're taking population from other areas or really taking the increase in population from other areas. So looking at modifying allocations within climate-friendly areas require us to take a look at the entire jurisdiction. I'll conclude a little bit with our model runs that we did for Ashland and then present some preliminary data based on those results. Some of the land use assumptions, again, we tapped city staff. They made themselves available, and we're very thankful for that. We assumed a housing capacity based on some projections that the city had as through their climate-friendly area work with the LCD at 15 dwelling units per acre, which is a little bit low, but again, working with the city planners helped us develop that. Based on that information, then proportion out the remaining households and jobs. I think in this case, we assumed the employment growth within the CFA was roughly the same as the population growth there. Always have to maintain our PSU totals. And then ultimately, this was a projection out for 2045 compared to the existing model, which was based on the region transportation plan, and then looking at our CFA. And you can see there in the table at the top right, the modifications, the reallocations increase the population within the CFA by about 1,100. Numbers don't add to 0. I'm not exactly sure why, but I think it's just maybe a matter of a counting exercise. And then you see a corresponding decrease within the non-CFA. So effectively from the existing conditions, the population in the CFA is expected to grow substantially faster than the non-CFA. Is that really going to happen? That's always sort of the question with predicting the future in models, but through this type of planning, this type of modeling, that's, we're looking and gazing into our crystal ball. One key point here, as far as approval from the Oregon Employment Department, that did sort of hang things up a little bit. I think that becomes a lesson learned. It shouldn't be a surprise really, but also getting all sort of the ducks in order to make sure we have our NDAs and things like that is key, and that's also one of the reasons we're providing guidelines to do modeling work as soon as possible. RSG and TPAL did 2 model runs. For the first one, mostly because we were waiting on the OED approval of the employment, we only did the population run for number 1. And the information here in bullet points may be a little bit easier to see on the next slide where I actually have the tabular data, but ultimately, and we were expecting these 2 results, that the VMT per capita calculated for population within the CFA was lower than the non-CFA, which is a positive result and something we were certainly aiming for. And the overall decrease it showed a larger decrease from existing conditions within the CFA relative to outside the CFA, which is also really nice. At least as far as some of the specific data, that walk mode share 0.6 is not a terrible amount, but again, this is just our population reallocation. And here's the data for that. There's a lot of information here. I try to really just highlight the tables. Again, we can always make slides available afterwards. But really the area I'm looking to highlight here in yellow in the bottom right of the table, that first line, negative 1.53%, shows the decrease in the CFA scenario relative to the RTP scenario for 2045 with the reallocation of those additional population to the CFA. There's some corresponding decrease in the non-CFA, and then overall, we're looking at a 1.4% decrease. Again, that's not relative to existing conditions, but that is relative to the RTP. So it shows, at least initially, for that first run, that the allocation of certain types of population to the CFA is producing the VMT moving in the right direction. On to run number 2. Sorry for sort of speeding through this. I want to make sure I can get through everything by 2. The second run also included the employment allocation, reallocation there. Also a generalized parking cost of $1 per. This wasn't long-term like overnight parking. It was just a way of accounting for some generalized parking costs within the CFA specifically. I would say mostly because of the employment reallocation, though the parking is important. There was even more positive results relative to the initial run, and that's shown here by the transit bike walk mode share. That's a combined mode share increase over 4%. Even in the non-CFAs, probably this is a lot of the TAZs adjacent to the CFAs or sort of close by, almost a 1% increase in non, at least in the transit bike walk mode share. That's of course the nice thing from the activity models, we're able to really pull that out. And then again, for the next slide, I'll show you a little bit more compared to the initial run. So again, similar data. You see run 1, hopefully it's not cut off, but you see far to the right side. And when we've added the employment, and again, this is really driving that mixed use component where people are able to travel for shopping, for retail, for work, that you see a pretty substantial decrease in the VMT per capita within the CFA, almost 5%. That brings the total Ashland change up to 2%, just over 2%. And again, we're seeing that positive effect. There's not a lot of detailed refinement in here. We know that we can go a little bit further, but again, as a case study point for Ashland, really we're just trying to show, or we're hoping we were trying to show, that the CFA itself is an effective way of reducing VMT per capita for the people that live within the area, as well as for the city as a whole. On to Milwaukee. So here was an area where Metro is running the model, and it took a lot of collaboration between this. So I thank everybody on the consultant team, as well as all the Metro staff that have participated and taken some time to do this. We really appreciate it. Milwaukee had done, prior to their ongoing transportation system plan process, which was done just before CFEC became encapsulated within the rules, that they had conducted a housing capacity analysis. And one of the things that we learned, again, maybe no surprise, but to use obviously the best available data and to really have a good understanding of what kind of people are going to be moving to certain areas and what sort of housing they need. Because Metro does planning for the entire region all at once. I mean, again, other MPOs do that too, but Metro's process really dials in on some very specific aspects of population and employment. We realized that after the fact, after the RTP, is not really the time to be able to make substantial changes in a city or county or city's allocation of housing or jobs for that matter. And we would certainly encourage cities, as part of the RTP process for the next one, to really get engaged, to do their own housing assessments at a minimum, as well as maybe an economic analysis, to really see if they can have some better data to improve on better data specific to their jurisdiction to help improve and provide more disaggregated information to Metro. I will talk about the VMT per capita in a moment, but just to say it took a little time to sort of work it out, and we're still sort of verifying to make sure it's consistent with a lot of other work we've done. As I mentioned, there were a couple of recently done pieces of work that City of Milwaukee produced with help that informed some of the work in the regional model. We took a look, or the consultant team took a look and did that housing size, income, and age analysis. Took a look at what we have for 2040, compared it across TAZs. For the most part, they were pretty much right on, though they did identify a couple that didn't seem to sort of match projections for certain types of housing in TAZs, and these are really focused on the downtown Milwaukee area. The consultants also took a look at overall transit coverage, intersection density, again, as a way of identifying the place type, TOD, or mixed-use characteristics. Once that work was done and allocations were done specifically in the TOD, in the CFA area, in the downtown part of Milwaukee, things were allocated elsewhere throughout the city. Blah blah blah. There was some modeling work done, and one of the aspects that really took quite a bit of time, and again, as I said, still working through, is really developing this non-home based VMT methodology as capturing one of those 4 types of VMT that we need to do for a trip that starts in Milwaukee, that travels outside. I mean, really, I guess suppose travels anywhere, but certainly within the model area, and then takes a trip for lunch during a work. That non-home-based trip is not specifically tied in the trip-based models back to that origin zone. So we needed a way of doing that this way, and there's some spreadsheets that sort of showed a couple different components here, but I think we've come up with a pretty good way. I will say there are some nuances here that mostly were focused on the home-based work trips that are originating from Milwaukee, not the home-based work trip that ends in Milwaukee. We could sort of work back from there and work mostly on the attraction side, not on the production side. There's also work for non-home-based work trip. Suffice to say, we looked at it at a couple different methods. We are providing some documentation as to why we selected one method. Both methods actually produce the same answer in a test. So we're documenting why we're doing what we're doing and why it's shown up, but we're also providing some information as to how methods can be refined in the future, and why we looked at certain things and rejected other approaches, whether that's for computational methods or otherwise. All right, next steps. Again, apologize for sort of blasting through all this. I know it's quite a bit of information. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of detail under all of these. But in terms of everybody getting a chance to look at the case study documentation, we are finalizing the Milwaukee case study. That should be done in the next week or so. Thankfully, all the work that Metro is doing for the project has been completed, and now all the materials in the consultant's hands for sort of final review. The Ashland case study is currently under review for the PMT. We hope to wrap that up later this week. And those will be available to send out to our OMSC working group, our TAC, and even the Analysis Procedure Manual user group for meetings in mid-May. These are our final group of meetings. Once we do that and publish the guidance, that will be available on our CFEC website. And then for the overall project, as I mentioned early, we are working on that toolbox for performance measures and standards. That's primarily to meet Rule 2215. We have those final meetings. The APM users group and internal staff now are reviewing that. Over the next couple of months, towards summer and the end of the contract, this material will get published in different parts of the APM and the modeling analysis guide. And then finally, we're also working with another one of the CFEC projects, the multimodal data collection, on some level of traffic stress work to produce some shape files that can be shared as part of the long range planning work within TSPs. And as I mentioned early on, our modeling and analysis guidelines do not end with the completion of this project. This is something that, like all modeling, really gets modified and put to its paces through actual practice in our field as we move through the TSPs. And we hope to continue to have this as a topic for the OMSC or maybe other groups in the state to really continue to modify and improve and add things, especially as we move towards activity-based models for all of our MPOs, or incorporate things like urban sim for land use modeling and et cetera. Okay. Any questions?